My mother threw a glass of red wine at my silk dress and called me a defect in front of hundreds of elite guests. My sister, draped in a custom bridal gown, tossed a crumpled $100 bill at my feet and told me to take an Uber back to the slums. It had been 7 years since my family of renowned doctors disowned me for refusing to go to medical school. They thought I was still the ugly high school graduate they had discarded. But when the groom walked out of the VIP suite and turned completely pale at the sight of me, my family was about to realize they had made a catastrophic mistake. My name is Isabella, and I am 33 years old. For as long as I can remember, I was the black sheep of a family that demanded absolute perfection. Growing up in a massive estate in the wealthy hills above Los Angeles, my parents, Richard and Patricia, had their entire lives mapped out for their children. My father was a highly respected surgeon with a god complex, and my mother treated our family name like it was royalty. In their world, you either became a doctor or you were nothing. Dinner conversations always revolved around surgical procedures, hospital politics, and status. I sat at the table in silence, completely isolated. My older sister Vanessa played the game perfectly. She became a successful plastic surgeon, marrying a man named Cameron, who was an ambitious chief medical officer. She was the golden child. I was the endless disappointment. 7 years ago, I made the unforgivable sin of refusing my acceptance to medical school to pursue a career in data and technology. The night I told them my decision, my father packed my bags and threw them onto the driveway in the pouring rain. My mother stood on the porch and told me I was dead to her. I walked away that night with nothing but the clothes on my back and a fierce determination to prove them wrong. Fast forward 7 years. I stood outside the magnificent glass doors of the Grand Meridian Hotel in Beverly Hills. The crisp evening air whipped around me as valet attendants rushed to open doors for men in tailored tuxedos and women in sparkling evening gowns. I smoothed down the fabric of my bespoke silver gown, taking a deep, steadying breath. I had not seen or spoken to my family since the night they kicked me out. I only found out about Vanessa's extravagant wedding through a mutual acquaintance. I did not come tonight to seek their approval, and I certainly did not come to beg for a place at their table. I came because I had unfinished business, and I wanted to look the people who broke me straight in the eyes. I stepped into the grand lobby, the heavy doors closing behind me and shutting out the city noise. The air smelled of expensive cedar and vanilla. The ballroom was a vision of pure opulence. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over hundreds of guests from the medical elite. Waiters balanced trays of expensive champagne, and a live string quartet played softly in the corner. I walked into the room with my head held high, my heels clicking softly against the polished marble floor. It took exactly 2 minutes for her to spot me. My mother, Patricia, broke away from a group of wealthy hospital administrators. Her face tightly pulled from years of cosmetic procedures, twisted into a mask of pure fury. She marched toward me, her eyes locked onto mine with a familiar, burning hatred. Before I could even offer a greeting, she raised her crystal glass and hurled its contents directly at my chest. The dark red wine splashed violently against my silver silk dress, dripping down the expensive fabric and pooling on the marble floor beneath my feet. Gasps echoed from the nearby guests. The string quartet missed a note. The music faltered. I stood completely still, letting the cold liquid seep into the silk, refusing to give her the satisfaction of seeing me flinch. "Why is this defect here?" my mother hissed, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. She glared at me as if I were a piece of garbage that had somehow blown into the pristine ballroom. "Who let you into this hotel?" I did not raise my voice. I simply took a clean napkin from a paralyzed waiter nearby and dabbed at my dress. "Hello to you too, Mother. You are looking just as warm and welcoming as I remember." Before she could respond, the crowd parted. My sister Vanessa glided forward. She wore a custom bridal gown encrusted with thousands of hand-sewn crystals, a triumphant smile painted on her face. She looked me up and down, taking in the wine stain, and let out a harsh, mocking laugh. "I cannot believe you actually showed your face here," Vanessa said, crossing her arms. She reached into the small satin clutch hanging from her wrist and pulled out a crisp $100 bill. With a quick flick of her wrist, she crumpled the money and tossed it directly at my feet. It landed in the puddle of red wine. "You are not invited. Take this pocket change and get an Uber back to your slum, you ugly high school grad. This is a celebration for successful people. We do not need our charity case sister ruining the aesthetic." Her words were designed to humiliate me, to drag me back to the terrified 26-year-old girl crying on the driveway. She wanted me to feel small. She wanted the surrounding guests to know that I was nothing more than an uneducated failure who had crawled back to beg for scraps. The guests murmured among themselves, casting pitying and judgmental glances my way. I looked at the crumpled bill on the floor, then back up at Vanessa. I smiled. It was not a smile of defeat, but one of pure, unadulterated confidence. I was just about to speak when the heavy oak doors of the VIP suite swung open. Cameron, the groom, stepped out into the ballroom, adjusting the cuffs of his tuxedo. He was laughing with one of his groomsmen, looking like a man who had the entire world in the palm of his hand. But the moment he turned his head and his eyes landed on me, the laughter died in his throat. The color drained completely from his face, leaving him looking like he had just seen a ghost. He pushed past the crowd, practically sprinting toward where we stood. He shoved his way past my mother and stood between Vanessa and me, his chest heaving. "What is going on here?" Cameron demanded, his voice trembling. Vanessa scoffed, pointing a manicured finger at me. "I am just taking out the trash, honey. My pathetic sister decided to crash our wedding." Cameron turned to Vanessa, his eyes wide with a terror I had never seen before. "How dare you!" he shouted, his voice echoing across the silent ballroom. "This woman is—" I stepped forward, cutting off his panic declaration. I looked directly into my sister's confused, angry eyes and said, "You have no idea, do you?" At that exact moment, 4 broad-shouldered security guards in dark suits pushed their way through the crowd, heading straight for our circle. The entire ballroom held its breath, waiting to see who would be thrown out into the cool Beverly Hills night. The 4 security guards halted just inches away from where my mother, my sister, and Cameron stood. Behind them, the crowd parted once more, making way for a tall, distinguished man in a pristine charcoal suit. It was Mr. Sterling, the general manager of the hotel. My mother's chest puffed out with sheer triumph. She smoothed her designer dress and cast a condescending glare in my direction. She muttered, crossing her arms as she turned to greet the manager. "Mr. Sterling, thank goodness you are here. This woman crashed a private event. I demand you have your security team remove her immediately. She has ruined my daughter's perfect night." Mr. Sterling did not look at my mother. He did not acknowledge her arrogant command, nor did he spare a single glance for the furious bride standing beside her. Instead, he walked right past them, his leather shoes silent on the floor, his expression deadly serious, and stopped directly in front of me. The entire ballroom was so quiet you could hear the ice clinking in the champagne glasses and the soft, terrified breathing of the guests who had gathered around us. To the absolute shock of my family and every elite medical professional in the room, the general manager placed his hands at his sides and bowed deeply, a perfect 90-degree angle of unadulterated respect. It was a gesture reserved only for the highest tier of VIPs, a level of deference my parents had spent their entire lives trying and failing to command. I am so incredibly sorry for the disturbance, Madam Mr. Sterling said, his voice carrying clearly across the silent marble floor. If there is anything at all you need to make your evening more comfortable, please let me know at once. My team is entirely at your disposal tonight. My mother let out a sharp, breathless gasp. Vanessa's jaw practically hit the floor. The $100 bill she had thrown at me still lay soaked in the puddle of wine, looking pathetic and small. "What on earth are you doing?" my mother shrieked, her carefully maintained social grace completely abandoning her. "She is a nobody. She is an uneducated dropout who does not even have the money to pay for her own ride home. Why are you bowing to her? You should be throwing her out on the street." I smiled gently, taking a step toward my stunned family. I could see the absolute bewilderment flashing across their faces, their brains short-circuiting as they tried to process why the manager of a luxury establishment was treating their disowned daughter like royalty. Mr. Sterling stood up straight, turning a cool, professional gaze toward my mother. "Ma'am, I would strongly advise you to speak with respect when addressing this guest. You are currently standing in a private ballroom that this young woman personally guaranteed after the groom's payment failed." The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. You could have heard a pin drop. Vanessa let out a shrill, nervous laugh, looking wildly between me and the manager. "Paid for it? What are you talking about? My fiancé paid for this venue. Cameron took care of everything." I looked over at Cameron. He was sweating profusely, his hands trembling as he stared at the floor, unable to meet anyone's eyes. "Actually, Vanessa," I said, my voice smooth and loud enough for the surrounding guests to hear clearly. "Cameron tried to take care of everything. But unfortunately, exactly 15 minutes ago, the hotel's billing department tried to process the final payment for this extravagant reception. His credit card was declined due to insufficient funds." Cameron squeezed his eyes shut, shaking his head slowly. "I am sorry, Vanessa." The card bounced. They were going to shut down the bar and ask everyone to leave. I took a step closer to my sister, relishing the utter devastation blooming on her face. When the hotel management realized the groom was entirely broke and could not cover the $250,000 invoice they were preparing to cancel the event mid-reception. Imagine the humiliation. All of your wealthy colleagues, all of Father's Hospital administrators, being told to put down their drinks and leave because the golden couple was secretly bankrupt. I paused, letting the reality of the situation sink into their minds. I watched my sister's face crumble as the illusion of her perfect, wealthy marriage shattered in front of hundreds of people. But luckily for you, I was in the lobby when the payment failed. I handed Mr. Sterling my personal black card and authorized a temporary hold for the $250,000 balance, preventing the hotel from closing the reception while the final contractual liability remained with the people who booked it. So no, mother, I am not a defect crashing your exclusive party. I am the sole reason your golden child is not currently crying on the sidewalk in her crystal gown while the venue doors are locked behind her. I am the reason this evening was not shut down, and every one of you is standing here under my temporary guarantee." A collective murmur erupted from the guests. Whispers of declined credit cards and secret bankruptcies spread through the crowd like wildfire. My mother looked like she was going to have a stroke. Her chest heaved, her face turning an unnatural shade of crimson. "That is a lie!" a booming voice echoed from the back of the crowd. The guests parted nervously as my father, Richard, stormed toward us. He was an imposing man, a chief surgeon who demanded absolute obedience from everyone he encountered. His face was thunderous, his hands clenched into tight fists at his sides. He stopped next to my mother, glaring at me with the same intense disgust he had shown the night he kicked me out of his house 7 years ago. "Do not play your pathetic games here, Isabella," my father roared, pointing a rigid finger at my face. His eyes were wide with a frantic, desperate anger. You are a high school graduate with no degree, no career, and no future. You do not have $250,000. You never will. If you paid for this wedding, you either stole that money from someone else or you are sleeping with some rich old man who pities you enough to let you hold his credit card for the night. There is no other explanation for this circus. You always were a parasite. My father continued, his voice dripping with venom as he took another aggressive step toward me. You come back here after 7 years of complete silence, trying to humiliate your sister on the most important day of her life, just because you are jealous? You think flashing a stolen credit card makes you our equal in this room? You are nothing. You are a disgrace to my name, to the medical community we represent, and I will not let you ruin my family's pristine reputation in front of my esteemed colleagues. I did not back down. I met his furious gaze with absolute calm. You can believe whatever helps you sleep at night, Richard. But the fact remains that your perfect son-in-law is completely broke, and your perfect daughter's wedding was saved by the daughter you threw away like trash. My father's eyes narrowed into dangerous slits. He reached into the sleek leather briefcase he always carried to social events, the one that usually held his important hospital documents. He aggressively snapped the clasps open and pulled out a thick legal document bound in a blue folder. He slammed the heavy stack of papers onto the nearest cocktail table, knocking over a glass of water. He sneered, throwing a silver pen on top of the document. Sign this. Right here, right now, if you want to stay. But they had no idea who they were dealing with. I picked up the silver pen, letting it twirl casually between my fingers, as I looked down at the heavy legal document resting on the table. My father's chest swelled with pride, assuming I was about to submit to his demands. He was waiting for me to sign my life away, unaware of the devastating storm I was about to unleash upon his fragile, corrupt empire. I stared at the dense legal jargon printed on the thick ivory paper. The bold heading was impossible to misinterpret. It was an irrevocable waiver of inheritance rights. Specifically, it targeted the private trust fund established by my late grandfather William, a man who had been the only source of genuine warmth in my cold upbringing. Before passing away, my grandfather placed a substantial portion of his personal wealth into a protected trust, heavily insulated from my father's greedy hands. He explicitly named me as a primary beneficiary, knowing full well that Richard would try to cut me out of the family legacy. For 7 long years, my father had tried every legal loophole to crack that trust open and drain the accounts to fund his lavish lifestyle and his increasingly mismanaged medical clinics. Now he was trying to use my sudden appearance at this wedding as leverage to finally steal what was rightfully mine. Sign the paper, Isabella? My father ordered, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper meant only for me. You sign away your claim to the old man's money, and I will tell security to stand down. I will generously allow you to sit at the overflow table near the kitchen. You can watch your sister celebrate a real achievement, but if you refuse, I will drag you through a legal battle so vicious you will be paying court fees for the rest of your miserable life. I let out a soft, humorless laugh. I ran the tip of the silver pen along the signature line, feeling the eyes of every wealthy physician burning into my back. My father actually thought he could intimidate me with empty threats of legal ruin, completely oblivious to the fact that I currently employed some of the most ruthless corporate litigators in the country. He needed my grandfather's trust fund desperately. The signs were all there. The frayed edges of his composure, the panic disguised as rage, the sheer desperation of bringing legal documents to his own daughter's wedding reception. His private medical clinics were bleeding money, suffocating under his incompetence and my mother's excessive spending. Before I could respond, Vanessa pushed her way to the front, her massive, crystal-embellished gown rustling loudly against the marble floor. She stood shoulder to shoulder with our father, radiating a toxic, unearned arrogance. She looked at the pen in my hand and sneered, her lips twisting into a mask of pure disgust. Just sign the damn paper and get it over with, Vanessa spat, crossing her arms. Do not act like you actually deserve a single penny of grandfather's money. You dropped out of the family legacy to play with computers. You have no status. You think flashing a little cash tonight makes you powerful? That is nothing compared to what my husband just accomplished. Vanessa turned slightly, gesturing toward Cameron, who was currently looking like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. She threw her head back, her voice raising dramatically so that every guest in the ballroom could hear her brag. My amazing husband just finalized a historic acquisition deal this very morning, Vanessa announced, her eyes shining with manic pride. He successfully negotiated the sale of our family's clinic network to Apex Health. Yes, you heard me correctly. Apex Health, the largest medical technology investment fund in the entire country. They are buying our clinics for tens of millions of dollars. We are about to become incredibly wealthy, Isabella. Wealthy on a scale you cannot even begin to comprehend. We will be sitting on the board of a multi-billion-dollar health empire while you are still playing pretend. A wave of impressed murmurs swept through the crowd. Apex Health was a titan in the industry, a notoriously selective investment firm known for buying out struggling medical facilities and ruthlessly restructuring them into highly profitable AI-driven diagnostic centers. For a struggling clinic network to secure a buyout from Apex Health was like winning the lottery. The guests began to whisper their congratulations, completely unaware of the dark, poetic irony unfolding right in front of them. So you see, Vanessa continued turning her venomous glare back to me. We do not actually need grandfather's little trust fund to survive. My father just wants to clean up loose ends and officially erase you from our financial history. We are partnering with billionaires. You could live 100 lifetimes and you would never, ever be allowed into the same room as the executives at Apex Health. Sign the paper, take your pathetic little victory of paying for the catering, and crawl back under whatever rock you came from. I did not blink. I did not flinch. I just stood there absorbing her magnificent, towering ignorance. I looked past her and locked eyes with Cameron. The groom was sweating so profusely that his stiff white collar was completely soaked. He was staring at my face, then at the black credit card still resting in Mr. Sterling's hand, and then back at my face. He had seen my name on that card. Isabella Vance. A name he had undoubtedly seen printed on the bottom of a massive stack of acquisition contracts he had been reviewing for the past 6 months. The realization was hitting him like a freight train. He was slowly, horrifyingly putting the pieces together. Cameron took a shaky step forward, his hands raised in a desperate, placating gesture. Vanessa, shut up, he hissed, his voice cracking with sheer terror. Just shut your mouth right now. Stop talking. Vanessa snapped her head around to look at her new husband, her eyes wide with shock and indignation. Excuse me? She snapped, her tone dripping with offense. Why are you yelling at me? I am defending our family. I am putting this trash exactly where she belongs. Tell her, Cameron. Tell her about the millions we are getting from the buyout. Tell her how powerful we are about to be. Cameron lunged forward, grabbing Vanessa by the upper arm and violently yanking her backward. He was no longer trying to maintain his composed, professional demeanor. He looked like a man standing on the edge of a cliff, watching the ground crumble beneath his feet. I said shut up, Cameron roared, his voice breaking into a panicked squeak. Do you have any idea what you are doing? Do you have any idea who you are talking to? Let go of me! Vanessa shrieked, ripping her arm out of his grasp. She stumbled back, almost tripping over the heavy train of her wedding gown. She glared at him, completely oblivious to the danger surrounding her. Have you lost your mind? Are you seriously defending her right now? My father is right. She is just a manipulative liar who stole a credit card to ruin my night. I will not let her stand here and act like she is better than us. My father stepped forward, deeply irritated by the sudden conflict between the bride and groom. Cameron, control your wife, Richard barked, using his sternest surgical command voice. And Isabella, my patience is entirely gone. You have exactly 3 seconds to sign that waiver, or I am calling the police and having you arrested for trespassing, harassment, and whatever financial crimes you committed to get that money. 1. I looked down at the cold silver pen in my right hand. It was a beautiful, heavy instrument, custom engraved with the elegant logo of my father's precious, failing medical practice. I slowly lowered the tip of the pen toward the blank signature line on the thick ivory paper. My father exhaled a sharp, heavy breath of relief, a cruel, triumphant smirk spreading across his weathered face. Vanessa crossed her arms tightly, nodding in deep, smug satisfaction. Cameron simply squeezed his eyes shut, turning his head away as if he could not bear to watch the imminent destruction. 2, my father counted, his voice dripping with absolute condescension. Good girl. Finally learning your exact place in this family, Isabella. I did not sign the damn paper. Instead, I firmly grasped the top and bottom edges of the heavy legal document. Looking directly into my father's arrogant eyes, I ripped it right down the middle. The sound of the thick ivory paper tearing echoed like a gunshot across the tense ballroom. I did not stop there. I placed the 2 torn halves together and ripped them again, reducing my father's meticulously crafted legal threat into worthless confetti. I let the shredded pieces flutter from my fingers, watching them drift down to join the crumpled $100 bills soaking in the spilled red wine on the floor. My father staggered backward, as if physically struck. The triumphant smirk vanished from his face, replaced by a slack-jawed expression of absolute disbelief. He looked at the shredded remains of the trust waiver, his hands trembling violently. For a man who spent his life controlling everyone, witnessing his ultimate leverage completely destroyed so casually was a reality his arrogant mind simply could not process. Vanessa let out a hysterical shriek. "You crazy witch!" she screamed, her voice shrill and echoing off the crystal chandeliers. "Do you have any idea what you just did? You just threw away your only chance to be a part of this family. You are going to be sued into oblivion." I gave my angry sister no response. I did not raise my voice, and I did not engage in her frantic screaming match. Instead, I simply turned my back on her entirely. I stepped past my paralyzed father, leaving my furious family standing in the center of their ruined reception, and walked purposefully toward the small stage set up at the front of the ballroom. A lone microphone stood on a sleek silver stand, abandoned by the string quartet when the chaos had erupted. I stepped onto the platform, the soft hum of the microphone coming to life as I pulled it from its stand. The hundreds of guests in the room, elite surgeons, wealthy hospital administrators, and powerful medical investors, watched me with rapt, terrified attention. They had all been invited to celebrate a merger that would supposedly make my family untouchable. They were about to witness the brutal, unvarnished truth. Richard Bancroft likes to paint a perfect picture of his medical empire, I said, my voice echoing clearly and calmly through the massive ballroom speakers. He just told all of you that I am a disgrace to the medical community. He wants you all to believe that his clinics are thriving, that this acquisition by Apex Health is a glorious victory lap for a legendary career. But since we are all gathered here tonight to celebrate transparency and new beginnings, I think it is only fair that the investors in this room know exactly what they are cheering for. I looked down at the crowd, my eyes scanning the sea of expensive suits and designer gowns until I found the specific hospital board members my father relied on for funding. Let us talk about the real numbers, I continued, my tone conversational yet deadly precise. Let us talk about the $32 million deficit currently hiding in the offshore accounts of the Bancroft family clinics. Let us talk about the fraudulent billing practices used to inflate the quarterly revenue reports over the past 5 years. My father did not secure a buyout from Apex Health because his clinics are innovative or profitable. He begged for a buyout because if he does not secure an injection of capital by the end of this fiscal quarter, the banks are going to foreclose on every single one of his properties, including the surgical center he is so incredibly proud of. A collective, horrified gasp swept entirely through the ballroom. The whispers began immediately, spreading like wildfire among the investors and medical professionals. Men and women who had just been congratulating my father on his success were now exchanging panicked, furious glances. The carefully constructed facade of the Bancroft family legacy was cracking, fracturing into a million irreparable pieces right in front of their eyes. "He is defaulting on his medical supply loans," I said, making sure my voice remained perfectly steady over the rising commotion. "He has leveraged the pensions of his own administrative staff to cover the operating costs of his failing facilities. The only reason this lavish $250,000 wedding is happening tonight is because my father and my sister desperately needed to project an illusion of wealth to keep their angry creditors from knocking down their front doors before the acquisition paperwork was finalized." "Lies," my father roared from the center of the room, his face turning an alarming shade of purple. He was sweating profusely, looking wildly at the investors, who were now backing away from him. "Do not listen to a word this vindictive woman says. She is just a psychotic dropout trying to destroy my life because she is jealous." It was then that my mother Patricia finally snapped. The woman who had spent decades worshipping social status and public perception could no longer handle the sheer humiliation of having her family's dirty laundry aired in front of them all. With a feral, unhinged scream, she shoved her way past the bewildered guests and charged toward the stage. Her eyes were wide with a manic, murderous rage. She raised her hand, her heavy diamond rings catching the light, preparing to strike me across the face with everything she had. "You ungrateful, lying little wretch!" my mother shrieked, her hand swinging forward in a vicious arc. "I will kill you for this!" I did not flinch. I did not even raise my arms to block her attack. I simply stood my ground, waiting for the impact. But the impact never came. A hand shot out from the crowd, grabbing my mother's wrist with such an incredibly sudden and brutal force that she let out a sharp cry of pain. The heavy diamond ring scraped against the assailant's grip, but the hand did not budge. The entire room froze in absolute shock. It was Cameron, the proud, arrogant groom who had just spent the last 20 minutes cowering in silence, had suddenly vaulted himself between me and my furious mother. He stood squarely in front of me, breathing heavily, his tuxedo jacket rumpled and his face completely drained of color. He did not look at me. His terrified eyes were locked entirely on my mother. "Let go of me, Cameron!" my mother spat, struggling wildly to free her wrist from his desperate grip. "Have you lost your mind? She is destroying your wedding. She is destroying our family. Help me get her out of here." Cameron did not let go. Instead, with a forceful, trembling shove, he pushed his angry future mother-in-law backward. My mother stumbled on her high heels, nearly falling into the arms of a horrified guest. She looked at Cameron as if he had just grown a second head. Vanessa let out a blood-curdling scream from the back of the room, gathering the heavy skirts of her wedding dress as she ran toward her new husband. "Cameron, what the hell are you doing?" Vanessa shrieked, tears of pure rage streaming down her perfectly contoured face. "Why are you defending her? She is a liar and a thief. Grab her and throw her out." Cameron did not look at his bride. He did not even look at my mother or my father, who were now staring at him in complete and utter bewilderment. Slowly, shakily, the ambitious chief medical officer turned around to face me. The man who had mocked me, The man who had happily married into a family that treated me like garbage was now trembling so violently that he could barely stand. He looked slowly at the microphone in my hand, then up at my face. The absolute terror in his eyes was palpable. It was the look of a man who had just realized he was standing on the train tracks and the headlights were blinding him. Without a single word to his furious wife, without a single glance at the wealthy crowd watching his every move, the proud, arrogant groom did the unthinkable. Cameron's shaking knees buckled. He dropped heavily onto the hard stage floor, landing squarely on both knees right in front of my feet. The thud of his knees hitting the wood echoed through the microphone I was still holding. The entire ballroom erupted into absolute stunned silence. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. My family stood paralyzed, watching the man they thought was their golden ticket groveling at the feet of the daughter they had thrown away. Cameron reached out his trembling hands, grasping the edge of my silver gown. He looked up at me, tears of pure panic pooling in his eyes, and his voice shook as it echoed through the microphone for everyone to hear. "Please," he begged, his voice cracking with absolute desperation. "Please, Madam Founder, have mercy on us." I let Cameron's plea hang in the air until every person in the ballroom understood the meaning of the title he had used. Madam Founder. The two words moved through the crowd in whispers first, uncertainly, and then with growing recognition. Several investors turned toward one another. A hospital chairman near the front lifted his phone and searched my name. His expression changed before he lowered the screen. Vanessa stared at Cameron as if he had started speaking a foreign language. "Founder of what?" she demanded. She looked from his kneeling body to me, and then to the guests, who had begun backing away from her family. "Cameron, get up. Stop embarrassing me. Tell everyone she is lying." He did not move. His fingers tightened around the edge of my stained silver gown. "Isabella," he whispered, forgetting the audience for a moment. "I did not know she was going to treat you like this. I swear, I did not know Richard would bring the trust waiver. Please do not terminate the acquisition before we can talk privately." That sentence did what my title alone could not. The room erupted. The lead investors who had applauded Vanessa's announcement only minutes earlier now understood that Cameron was not begging a stranger. He was begging the person who controlled the transaction he had promised would save the Bancroft clinics. I stepped back, forcing him to release my dress. "There will be no private conversation," I said. "You built your position inside my company by presenting yourself as disciplined, ethical, and independent. Tonight, in front of the people you intended to deceive, we will discuss everything openly." Richard pushed through the crowd, his face still flushed with rage. "This is absurd," he said. "Apex Health is controlled by institutional investors and a national board. No uneducated dropout simply owns a fund of that size. Cameron is frightened and confused. Someone should remove both of them before this spectacle causes permanent damage." I looked at my father and remembered the night he had left my suitcase in the rain. He had told me that without his name, his money, and his medical connections, I would disappear. For the first year after I left, I slept in a rented room above a 24-hour laundromat and worked 3 jobs. During the day, I cleaned data for a small diagnostic laboratory. At night, I rebuilt the predictive system Richard had stolen from me, using a completely new architecture so he could never claim ownership of it. I learned corporate finance from free courses, pitched skeptical investors from borrowed conference rooms, and accepted rejection after rejection until one ethical physician understood what the technology could do. That physician introduced me to 2 seed investors. The prototype reduced preventable diagnostic errors in 3 community clinics. The results attracted a university hospital. The hospital attracted a regional network. Within 4 years, the company had become Apex Health, a healthcare technology and restructuring fund that used data systems to rescue failing medical organizations without sacrificing patient care. I kept my public profile deliberately limited because I wanted the work, not my face, to define the company. Richard had mistaken privacy for failure. I reached into the hidden pocket of my gown and removed a slim, black access card embossed with the Apex Health emblem. I held it beside the black payment card Mr. Sterling was still carrying. The names matched: Isabella Vance, founder and executive chair. "This is not proof," Vanessa snapped. "Anyone can print a card." She lifted her chin, though her voice had begun to shake. "You found out about the acquisition and created a costume. You paid actors to bow to you. Cameron is helping you because he wants to humiliate me." The main ballroom doors opened before I could answer. 4 people entered in a precise line. Maya Chen, Apex Health's general counsel, carried a locked document case. Daniel Price, our chief financial officer, held the original acquisition binder. Behind them came the director of corporate security and the independent accounting partner who had led the due diligence review. Every executive in the medical investment world recognized at least one of them. Maya stopped at the foot of the stage. "Madam Founder," she said, "we have the board resolutions controlling interest records acquisition authority and the signed instructions suspending all transfers connected to the Bancroft transaction. The hotel security team has also secured the exits you requested." She opened the case on a nearby table. Inside were certified corporate records bearing state seals, board signatures, and my name. Daniel placed the acquisition binder beside them and turned to the signature page. My authorization appeared above Cameron's not as a consultant or junior employee, but as the final approving authority. The transaction had never been completed. It remained conditional upon a clean forensic review and my personal consent. Vanessa leaned over the documents, searching desperately for a flaw. Her face lost color as she reached the ownership schedule. It showed that I held the controlling voting interest in Apex Health and chaired the board that employed her new husband. Richard tore the page from her hand. He scanned it once, then again. His lips moved silently over the numbers. The paper began to tremble between his fingers. "You said the deal closed this morning," Vanessa whispered to Cameron. Cameron finally lifted his head. "I said the committee meeting went well," he admitted. "I never said the funds had transferred. The founder had not issued final approval." "You let me announce it to everyone," she said. "You announced it because you never listen," Cameron answered, his fear briefly sharpening into anger. "I spent 6 months warning you and Richard not to celebrate until the forensic review was finished. You kept saying your family name made rejection impossible." I took the acquisition binder from Daniel and faced the ballroom. "Apex Health did consider purchasing the Bancroft clinics," I said. "We considered it because hundreds of employees and thousands of patients should not suffer for one family's mismanagement. But a rescue transaction is not a reward. It depends on complete disclosure, lawful records, and leadership capable of reform. The Bancrofts provided none of those things." Richard recovered enough breath to shout, "You targeted us! You built this company to destroy me!" "No," I replied. "I built Apex Health to protect patients from people like you. Your clinics entered our acquisition pipeline through an outside broker. I did not recognize the holding company name until the preliminary records reached my desk. Once I did, I removed myself from day-to-day negotiation and ordered an independent investigation so no one could accuse me of acting from personal revenge. The evidence condemned you without my help." The distinction mattered. Several board members in the crowd nodded. They understood that I had followed governance rules, while my family had relied on arrogance and fraud. Vanessa pointed at the screens above the dance floor. "Then show us," she said. "If you have evidence, stop speaking in riddles and show everyone." I looked at Maya. She gave one controlled nod. The legal holds were in place. The relevant patient information had been redacted, the federal referrals had been filed, and the presentation had been cleared for disclosure to the affected investors. I turned back toward Vanessa. You spent 7 years telling people I was too stupid to enter your world, I said. Tonight, I am going to show this room exactly what your medical credentials were used to hide. I crossed to the audiovisual station and connected my tablet to the main system. The engagement photographs disappeared from the enormous screens. A black title page replaced them: Bancroft Clinics, Independent Forensic Due Diligence. Beneath it appeared the Apex Health seal and my name as final reviewing authority. The first evidence file opened. Vanessa stopped breathing. Richard's hand released the acquisition page, and it drifted to the floor, beside the trust waiver he had tried to force me to sign. I did not offer Cameron a single word of comfort. I simply turned away from his trembling figure and walked back toward the edge of the stage, retrieving my tablet from a secure pocket hidden in the folds of my silver gown. This device contained the culmination of months of grueling investigative work. I located the audiovisual station and plugged my cable into the main jack. Above the massive dance floor, 3 giant screens had been displaying a rotating slideshow of Vanessa and Cameron's engagement photos, projecting an image of absolute perfection. I tapped a single button on my screen, and those joyful, fabricated images instantly vanished. The ballroom plunged into a momentary darkness before the giant screens flared back to life. Instead of smiling faces, the displays were now filled with stark, undeniable evidence. Hundreds of scanned documents, corporate emails, and highlighted financial spreadsheets were projected in massive detail for every surgeon and investor to read. The text was large enough that even the guests standing by the heavy oak doors at the back of the room could see the damning information clearly. I picked up the microphone again, my voice echoing through the silent, captivated room. When Apex Health targets a medical network for a multi-million-dollar acquisition, we do not just look at the glossy brochures you hand out at your charity galas. I explained my tone, steady and authoritative. We conduct a rigorous, uncompromising due diligence process. As the founder of the fund, I personally oversaw the investigation into the Bancroft family clinics. Richard told you all that his clinics were struggling because of a shifting economy and rising costs. He claimed he needed a temporary injection of capital to stabilize his medical empire. That was a carefully constructed lie, designed to hide a massive criminal enterprise. I tapped my tablet, and the displays shifted to show a series of highlighted billing statements. The documents bore the official letterhead of the Bancroft clinics, signed by my father and sister. Let us talk about why this medical network is bankrupt, I continued, pacing slowly across the stage so that everyone could hear every word. Over the past 5 years, Richard and Vanessa have been running a highly organized, systematic Medicare fraud operation right under the noses of the federal government. They have been billing insurance providers for complex, expensive surgical procedures that were never actually performed on their patients. They invented ghost surgeries, falsified treatment codes, and drained millions of dollars from the healthcare system to fund their own lavish, excessive lifestyles. The crowd erupted into shocked gasps. Men in expensive suits pointed at the screens, their faces twisting in deep disgust as they read the evidence. Women whispered frantically to one another, pulling their phones from their designer clutches to alert their own legal teams. But the theft was not enough for them, I said, my voice rising above the murmuring crowd to ensure my family heard every accusation. I tapped the tablet again, switching the display to show redacted patient files. Beside the medical records were direct email chains between Vanessa and my father discussing how to alter patient histories to justify ordering unnecessary, highly addictive pain medications. The emails were dated, time-stamped, and completely undeniable. To maximize their illegal profits, they did something far worse than just stealing money, I told the horrified audience. They actively falsified the medical records of vulnerable patients. They ordered dangerous, unneeded treatments and prescribed heavy medications simply to push the billing codes higher. They compromised the health and safety of the people who trusted them all, so they could buy designer clothes, luxury cars, and throw $250,000 wedding. My father looked like a man who had just been struck by lightning. He staggered backward, his hands grasping the edge of a cocktail table to keep himself from collapsing onto the marble floor. His face was entirely drained of color, his chest heaving as he stared at his own damning words projected in 10-foot letters above him. He opened his mouth to shout, to deny the accusations, but no sound came out. The evidence was absolute. It was pulled directly from his own private servers, authenticated by the top forensic accountants in the country. There was no escaping the truth. Vanessa grabbed her head with both hands, her perfect bridal hair falling into a messy, frantic tangle around her pale face. "No, no, no, this is fake!" Vanessa screamed, her voice cracking with sheer, unadulterated panic. She looked wildly at the guests, her eyes begging for someone to believe her. "She hacked our system. She doctored these emails to frame us. Cameron, tell them she is lying. Tell them we run a legitimate practice." Cameron did not move to defend his new wife. He remained kneeling on the floor, his head resting in his hands as he quietly sobbed. He knew the documents were real. As the chief medical officer, he had likely suspected the discrepancies for months, but had chosen to look the other way, to secure his place in this wealthy family. Now his willful ignorance was going to cost him everything he had ever worked for. The elite medical professionals in the room, the very people my parents had spent decades trying to impress, were now actively turning their backs on my family. Several prominent hospital board members were already walking quickly toward the exit, desperately trying to distance themselves from a massive federal crime before the fallout could ruin their own careers. The looks of admiration and respect that my father had basked in just an hour ago were entirely gone. They were replaced by expressions of profound disgust, horror, and condemnation. The social standing my mother had literally worshipped, the reputation she had traded her own daughter for, was entirely eradicated in a matter of minutes. "You destroyed my life to protect a legacy built on federal crimes," I said, looking directly at my father. "You called me a defect because I refused to participate in your corrupt, disgusting practices. You kicked me out into the street because I chose integrity over your fraudulent empire. And you spent the last 7 years convincing yourselves that you were superior, that I was just a failure who would never amount to anything. But the truth always comes out, Richard. And tonight, the truth is that I am the one holding the keys to your entire future, and you are nothing but a common criminal wearing a white coat." My father looked around the room like a trapped animal. The arrogant, imposing surgeon was completely gone. In his place stood a terrified, desperate old man who finally realized that his reign of terror had come to an absolute end. He darted his eyes toward the heavy oak doors at the back of the ballroom, his survival instincts kicking in. He knew that the evidence I had just presented was enough to expose him to a devastating federal sentence. He took a shaky step toward the exit, preparing to abandon his wife and his golden child to save himself. But he was entirely too late. Before Richard could take another step, a sharp, piercing sound cut through the tense atmosphere of the ballroom. It was the loud, unmistakable wail of police sirens. The sound grew rapidly louder, echoing off the tall skyscrapers outside and filtering through the thick glass windows of the luxury hotel. Brilliant flashes of red and blue light suddenly painted the walls of the ballroom, cutting through the warm golden glow of the crystal chandeliers. The sheer volume of the sirens indicated that this was not a simple patrol car responding to a noise complaint. This was a massive, coordinated tactical raid. The guests rushed to the windows, looking down at the street below in absolute shock. Dozens of heavily armored vehicles had swarmed the hotel entrance, completely blocking off the valet parking circle. Agents wearing dark tactical gear and windbreakers emblazoned with the bright yellow letters of the Federal Bureau of Investigation were pouring out of the vehicles. They moved with swift, terrifying precision, establishing a secure perimeter around the entire building in a matter of seconds. The sirens grew louder until they seemed to vibrate through the crystal chandeliers. Red and blue lights swept across the ballroom windows, cutting through the warm gold of the reception. Guests moved away from the doors, some clutching their phones, others staring at Richard, as though they had only now realized they had been celebrating beside a criminal. Patricia's fury collapsed into panic. She hurried toward me, then dropped to her knees so abruptly that the hem of her designer dress spread across the floor. Her hands closed around the lower edge of my stained gown. "Isabella, please!" she cried. "Do not let them take your father and sister. Whatever happened, we are still a family. I am still your mother. I loved you even when you made choices I did not understand." The performance was so sudden that several guests looked uncomfortable. Only minutes earlier she had tried to strike me. Now she pressed her cheek against my dress as if she were the abandoned one. "You loved me," I repeated. "I always did," Patricia insisted. "I was angry 7 years ago. Mothers say terrible things when they are afraid for their children. I knew you would survive. I knew you were strong. Everything we did was meant to push you toward a better life." I removed my phone from my clutch. For 7 years I had kept one message in an encrypted archive. I had not saved it because I enjoyed pain. I saved it because, on the nights when exhaustion tempted me to return, I needed to remember exactly what waited behind that door. I connected the phone to the ballroom sound system. Patricia saw the file name on my screen and stopped speaking. The message began with the sound of rain striking a porch roof. Then, her younger voice filled the ballroom, cold and unmistakable. "Do not call this house again, Isabella. You chose computers over this family. If you freeze, starve, or die in a gutter, that is your decision. You are a defect, and defects are removed before they contaminate everything around them." The recording ended. No one moved. Patricia slowly released my gown. Her mouth opened, but there was no explanation large enough to cover the words everyone had heard. A woman near the front, one of Patricia's longtime charity committee friends, stepped backward with tears in her eyes. A hospital administrator shook his head in open disgust. The last shelter of respectable motherhood had vanished. "That was not me," Patricia whispered. "The date, originating number, and digital signature are preserved," Maya Chen said from beside the stage. "The recording has already been authenticated for the civil proceedings involving the trust." Richard used the distraction to move. He backed toward the catering corridor, knocking over a tall arrangement of white roses. Glass shattered. Instead of stopping, he turned and ran for the service doors. He reached them just as they opened from the other side. A coordinated team of federal agents entered the ballroom in navy jackets marked FBI and HHS-OIG. They did not storm in wildly or aim weapons at the guests. They moved with practiced control, directing civilians away from the center aisle, while 2 agents intercepted Richard. He tried to reverse direction, but they caught both arms and pressed him against the wall before he made 3 steps. Richard Bancroft, the lead agent, said, "You are under arrest pursuant to federal warrants alleging healthcare fraud, wire fraud, falsification of medical records, conspiracy, and obstruction of a federal investigation. You have the right to remain silent." Richard twisted against them. "This is a private family dispute," he shouted. "My daughter manufactured everything. Call the hospital board. Call Senator Hale. Tell them who I am." The agent secured one wrist and then the other. "Tonight, you are the subject named on the warrant, Dr. Bancroft. Your contacts do not alter the evidence." Vanessa screamed and lifted the heavy skirt of her wedding gown, trying to run toward her father. 2 female agents blocked her path. "Vanessa Bancroft," one of them said. "We also have a warrant for your arrest on charges connected to fraudulent billing, falsified patient histories, unlawful prescribing, and conspiracy." "You cannot arrest me at my wedding!" Vanessa shrieked. I am a physician. Those files are protected. Isabella committed a crime by showing them. The records displayed tonight were lawfully obtained during a consented acquisition review, the agent replied. Patient identifiers were redacted. Your counsel can raise any objections in court. That calm answer frightened Vanessa more than shouting would have. She looked around for someone to intervene. The hospital executives avoided her eyes. Her former friends moved behind the federal perimeter. Even Patricia remained frozen beside the stage, unable to rebuild the maternal performance the voicemail had destroyed. Vanessa turned toward Cameron. "Save me," she demanded. "You work for Apex Health. Call the corporate attorneys. Tell Isabella to withdraw the complaint. Tell them the acquisition will cover the money." Cameron remained on his knees. His face had gone gray. He understood that federal warrants could not be withdrawn like wedding invitations, and that I had never controlled the criminal case. My company had supplied evidence. Federal investigators had made their own decision. "Do something!" Vanessa screamed. "You promised I would never have to worry about money or consequences again!" That promise drew several bitter laughs from the guests. Cameron flinched. The lead agent approached the stage and showed Maya the warrant inventory. She checked the case numbers, then handed him a sealed drive containing the full forensic package. The transfer was logged in front of 2 witnesses. Every step was documented. Richard could not later claim that I had slipped private revenge into an unofficial raid. The agent then faced me. "Ms. Vance, we will need a complete statement and access to the preserved corporate servers tomorrow morning. For tonight, your cooperation is sufficient. Hotel security should keep all remaining guests away from the evidence tables. Understood?" I said. Richard heard my surname and stared at me. Vance had been my grandfather's middle name, the one I had chosen when I built a life separate from the Bancrofts. He finally understood that the daughter he had tried to erase had created an identity his influence could not reach. As the agents led him toward the main doors, he looked at Patricia. "Help me," he said. She did not move. Without his money, his title, and his command, she had no idea how. The female agents took Vanessa by the arms. She fought them, twisting so violently that several crystals tore free from her gown and scattered across the marble. She reached for Cameron with both hands, but the distance between them widened. "Cameron," she pleaded now, her voice breaking. "Tell them I did not know. Tell them Father handled the billing. Tell them you will protect me." He opened his mouth, but fear had taken every useful word from him. The agents drew Vanessa's arms behind her and reached for the steel handcuffs. He opened his mouth, but not a single sound managed to escape his trembling lips. Cameron stared at Vanessa as if she were a total stranger. The federal agents secured heavy steel handcuffs tightly around her wrists, forcing her arms behind her back. The sharp click of the locking mechanism echoed sharply, sealing her fate. Vanessa refused to accept the reality of her situation. She thrashed against the physical restraint of the 2 armed agents holding her, her expensive crystal gown tearing at the seams. The delicate white fabric ripped loudly, exposing layers of tulle underneath. But she did not care about the ruined dress anymore. Her perfectly styled hair fell in absolute disarray across her tear-stained face as she continued to scream at the man she had just married. "Call the corporate legal team right now, Cameron!" Vanessa shrieked, her voice echoing with a manic, delusional authority. She stomped her expensive heel against the marble floor, completely ignoring the federal agents who were now pulling her firmly toward the main doors. "You are the chief medical officer of Apex Health. You have the best lawyers in the entire state on your payroll. Tell these ridiculous agents to take these cuffs off me immediately. Tell them who we are. We are untouchable. You need to bail me and my father out of this right now before they ruin our reputation forever. Do something. Do not just sit there like a coward while your wife is being treated like a common criminal." My father, Richard, was already being marched past the shattered cocktail tables. He kept his head down, completely broken, unable to look at his hysterical daughter or the hundreds of former colleagues watching his humiliating downfall. The federal agents did not slow their pace. They handled the arrogant surgeon with the exact same rough efficiency they used on any other fraud suspect. Vanessa watched her father being dragged away, and the panic in her eyes amplified. She pulled desperately against the officers holding her, turning her frantic gaze back to Cameron, who was still kneeling motionless on the floor. I walked slowly across the stage, my silver silk gown gliding smoothly over the wooden platform. I stepped down onto the main ballroom floor, my heels clicking softly against the marble as I approached the weeping groom. I stopped right beside Cameron, looking down at his pathetic, shivering form. Vanessa saw me approaching him, and her face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated venom. "Get away from him, you jealous witch!" Vanessa screamed, spittle flying from her lips as she fought the agents holding her back. "You think your little stunt tonight changes anything? My husband is an executive at a multi-billion-dollar fund. He loves me, he will protect our family, and he will make sure you spend the rest of your miserable life rotting in a jail cell for doing this to us." I let out a soft, humorless laugh. I looked from my screaming sister down to the man she thought was her ultimate savior. I tilted my head slightly, studying the absolute terror radiating from Cameron's pale face. He was sweating so profusely that his crisp white shirt was now entirely translucent. "Is that what you told her, Cameron?" I asked, my voice calm, projecting clearly across the quiet space so that everyone remaining in the room could hear. "Did you tell your beautiful bride that you were going to be a powerful executive at my company? Did you promise her the world? Did you tell her that your position at Apex Health would provide an endless supply of wealth to fund her ridiculous, superficial lifestyle?" Cameron squeezed his eyes shut. A single, desperate sob escaped his throat. He shook his head, slowly refusing to look at his furious wife. Vanessa stopped struggling for a brief moment, her breath catching in her throat, as she watched her husband cower before me. "Cameron, what is she talking about?" Vanessa demanded, her voice dropping into a confused, terrified whisper. "Tell her to shut up. Tell her you are going to fix this." "He cannot fix this, Vanessa," I said, shifting my gaze back to my sister. "He cannot fix this because he is not your savior. He is just another parasite, exactly like you and Richard. You married a man you thought was your golden ticket, but you were too arrogant to realize that he was using you, just as much as you were using him." I turned my attention back to the groom. I pulled my tablet from the folds of my dress and tapped the screen, bringing up a highly classified internal audit report from Apex Health. I held the device out, forcing Cameron to look at the undeniable proof of his own destruction. "You see, Vanessa, your husband has a very expensive secret," I continued, ensuring my words sliced through the silent ballroom with absolute precision. "For the last 2 years, Cameron has been suffering from a severe, crippling gambling addiction. He has spent countless nights at underground casinos, racking up millions of dollars in personal debt to some very dangerous, very unforgiving people. When he realized that his creditors were threatening his life, he panicked. He needed a massive influx of cash to save himself, but his own bank accounts were completely drained." Cameron let out a loud, pathetic wail, burying his face in his hands. Vanessa stared at him in horrified disbelief, the blood draining rapidly from her cheeks as the awful truth began to settle into her mind. "So what does an ambitious, desperate chief medical officer do when he needs millions of dollars, fast?" I asked the crowd, my voice ringing with cold authority. "He abuses his position of power. He takes advantage of the corporate trust placed in him. Over the last 6 months, Cameron has been secretly accessing the emergency reserve funds of Apex Health. He set up a complex web of shell companies and offshore accounts, quietly siphoning millions of dollars out of my corporate accounts to pay off his massive gambling debts. The remaining investors and hospital board members murmured in shock. The man they had respected, the man who had facilitated the merger they had all banked on, was nothing but an embezzling thief. And the most pathetic part of all, I said, taking a step closer to Vanessa, is that he did not just steal from my company to save his own life. He stole from me to pay for this very wedding. That $250,000 catering bill that bounced tonight? That was supposed to be paid using a stolen corporate credit card linked directly to my company. The custom designer dress you are currently wearing, the expensive champagne your guests drank, the towering floral arrangements decorating this room. Cameron funded your entire fairy tale wedding using money he stole from the sister you threw out on the street. Vanessa looked like she had been physically struck. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. She stared at Cameron, her eyes wide with a profound, shattering realization. The wealthy, powerful husband she had bragged about, the man she used to prove she was infinitely better than me, was completely broke. He was a fraud. Her entire marriage was built on a desperate, pathetic lie. "You lied to me," Vanessa whispered, her voice cracking as the full weight of the betrayal crushed her spirit. "You told me you were wealthy. You told me we were going to be untouchable. You used me to get access to my family's network." "I did not want to do it," Cameron sobbed. "I am sorry." "You are not sorry," I stated coldly. "You had no idea you were stealing directly from the girl your new family abused. I am officially terminating your employment and turning this audit over to the agents standing behind you." Cameron collapsed completely. Federal agents arrested him, then dragged Vanessa away. Suddenly, Patricia locked her. Her desperation hardened into pure psychotic hatred. With terrifying speed, she grabbed the massive silver cake-cutting knife. Letting out a feral, blood-curdling scream, my mother charged across the marble floor, sprinting directly toward me with the lethal blade aimed straight at my chest. Right now. The silver blade caught the chandelier light as Patricia crossed the remaining distance. Her face no longer resembled the polished matriarch who had welcomed hospital donors an hour earlier. Rage had stripped away every practiced expression. She held the cake knife with both hands and drove it toward my chest. I did not have time to step aside. My security chief, Marcus Reed, did. He had remained near the west wall throughout the reception, close enough to intervene, but far enough to avoid escalating a family confrontation. He moved between us in a blur, caught Patricia's knife wrist, and turned his body so the blade pointed safely toward the floor. Another guard secured her free arm. The knife struck the marble with a sharp metallic crack and spun beneath an empty table. Patricia screamed, kicked, and tried to bite Marcus's hand. The guards lowered her to the floor using a controlled hold rather than throwing her down. Federal agents shifted toward the commotion, then stopped when Marcus raised one open hand and identified himself. "Private security," he said. "Weapon secured, suspect contained." A female agent retrieved the knife with gloved hands and placed it inside an evidence sleeve. A second agent requested the hotel's security footage and called the Beverly Hills Police Department to process the assault separately. Patricia's decision had created a new case in front of hundreds of witnesses and dozens of cameras. "You made me do this," she shouted from the floor. "You destroyed my husband. You destroyed Vanessa. You came here planning to murder our family name." I walked toward her slowly. The wine stain on my dress had begun to dry into a dark shape across the silver silk, but I no longer felt embarrassed by it. It had become a record of exactly who she was. "No, Patricia," I said. "Richard destroyed himself when he stole from patients. Vanessa destroyed herself when she falsified their records. Cameron destroyed himself when he stole from my company. You are destroying yourself now because the people you abused have stopped protecting you from consequences." She struggled harder against the guards. "I am your mother! Order them to release me!" The word mother no longer had power after the voicemail. I looked toward Mr. Sterling. He stood near the damaged floral display with the hotel's event director and legal counsel. I had asked them to prepare written confirmation while the federal presentation was underway. Mr. Sterling approached and handed me a single embossed sheet. Earlier tonight, I had not paid the final wedding balance, I told the room. I had placed a temporary authorization hold on my black card so the hotel would not close the ballroom while evidence and guests were still inside. The contractual responsibility never transferred to me. Vanessa, Cameron, Richard, and Patricia had all signed the event agreement. Richard and Patricia had also signed a personal guarantee because Cameron's credit history failed the hotel's final review. My temporary hold could be released if the original parties breached the contract, committed fraud, or created a security emergency. In less than 1 hour, they had done all three. I held the letter where Patricia could see it. The hotel has now canceled my temporary guarantee. The full $250,000 balance, the damage to the ballroom, and the additional security costs remain the responsibility of the people who contracted for this wedding. Mr. Sterling nodded. That is correct. The hotel will submit its claim through the receivership and against the personal guarantors. Ms. Vance has no liability for the event. I lowered the paper until it rested on the marble in front of Patricia. The total was printed in bold at the bottom. You wanted me removed from a celebration you could not afford, I said. Now the invoice belongs exactly where the contract placed it. With you. Her eyes moved over the amount. For the first time, she seemed to understand that Richard's accounts would be frozen, the clinic revenue would stop, and the mansion she used as proof of superiority was already collateral for multiple loans. The bill was not merely an embarrassing number. It was the first visible piece of the financial collapse waiting outside the ballroom. Please, she whispered, changing tactics again. I was frightened. I did not mean to hurt you. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. Marcus looked at me, but did not loosen his hold. He was waiting only to know whether I needed distance, not whether I intended to forgive an assault. You picked up a knife and ran at my heart, I said. There is nothing unclear about that. The Beverly Hills officers arrived and formally took custody of her. One read the preliminary arrest grounds, while another photographed the knife and the path across the floor. Patricia began shouting about her husband's status, but each title sounded more useless than the last. The officers lifted her carefully and secured her wrists. Across the ballroom, Richard watched his wife being arrested. Vanessa was crying beside a federal agent. Cameron sat on the floor with his face in his hands. For the first time in their lives, none of them could command an employee, threaten a relative, or purchase silence. I thought the final secret had already been exposed. Then a measured voice came from the back of the room. Please wait, it said. The guests turned. An elderly man stepped out from beside the last occupied table, supporting himself with a carved wooden cane. Dr. Harrison had once served as chief of surgery and had mentored Richard at the beginning of his career. My father had spent decades seeking his approval. Richard's expression changed from anger to terror. Dr. Harrison walked into the open aisle. He looked first at me, then at the officers holding my father. I have remained silent for 7 years, he said. Before these agents remove Richard Bancroft from this room, there is another crime and another lie that must be placed on the record. Dr. Harrison's voice was not loud, but the authority in it settled the room. The federal agents paused their movement. Reporters had not yet entered the ballroom, and the remaining guests formed a silent semicircle around the old surgeon. Richard shook his head violently. Harrison, do not do this. You are confused. You have been retired for years. I am old, Harrison replied, but I am not confused. My failure was not memory. It was cowardice. He reached inside his coat and removed a small archival case, not merely a loose flash drive. The case contained a silver storage device, photocopies of laboratory notebooks, and a sealed envelope bearing the date from 7 years earlier. He handed the case to the lead federal agent, but kept the envelope. When Isabella was 24, Harrison began. She asked for permission to study anonymized surgical outcome data for an independent research project. She was not enrolled in medical school, but she understood statistical patterns better than most senior researchers I had supervised. Over 2 years, she built a predictive system capable of identifying dangerous complications before surgery. It was original, disciplined work. I reviewed early models myself. I remembered those nights clearly. I had worked in a storage room because Richard refused to give me formal research space. I used an old workstation after the clinic closed and saved copies to encrypted drives. Harrison had challenged my assumptions and insisted I document every revision. At the time, I believed his insistence would protect me. Richard discovered the final model before I could submit it under my own name. He took the drives from my room, accessed them using passwords he had demanded as a condition of living in his house, and filed the patent through a clinic subsidiary. He presented the algorithm as a collaboration led by himself. The National Medical Board praised him. Investors financed his expansion. My name disappeared. Harrison opened the envelope. Inside was a printed email chain. Richard had written that I had voluntarily assigned the program to the family business in exchange for tuition. No such agreement existed. A later message instructed Harrison to describe me as an unstable daughter who had abandoned the project. I knew that description was false, Harrison said. I also knew the source code reflected Isabella's notebooks. But Richard threatened to withdraw his clinics from our hospital network and expose unrelated administrative failures that would have cost hundreds of employees their jobs. I convinced myself that silence protected the institution. In truth, it protected my position. He faced me. Isabella, I cannot repair what my silence cost you. I can only tell the truth while it still matters. The lead agent opened the archival case and examined the inventory sheet. Harrison explained that the storage device contained time-stamped source code copied before Richard filed the patent. The notebook showed my handwritten formulas and revision history. The email chain documented Richard's plan to claim ownership and discredit me. An independent digital examiner had preserved and verified the files that morning. Richard lunged forward despite the handcuffs. "That code belonged to my clinic," he shouted. "She created it under my roof using my data. She was a child playing with numbers. I turned it into something valuable." "You turned it into collateral," I said. "You borrowed against a patent you did not own, used the award to attract patients, and then threw out the person who could prove the truth." Vanessa stared at our father. "You told me she deleted the original program," she said. "You said the version you patented was yours." Richard looked at her and made the mistake that finally destroyed the last possibility of denial. "I had to secure it before she ruined everything," he snapped. "She was going to give it away to a public hospital." The admission landed with more force than a confession prepared by lawyers. The lead agent immediately asked him to stop speaking until counsel was present. Richard continued anyway, desperate to make theft sound like leadership. "I built this family," he said. "I paid for her childhood. Anything created in my house belonged to me. She owed me that technology." "No parent owns a child's mind," Harrison answered. "And no surgeon has the right to convert theft into prestige." Several physicians in the room removed the Bancroft clinic pins from their lapels. A former medical board officer told the federal agent that he would provide records from the award committee. Another investor offered archived presentations, in which Richard had claimed he personally wrote the algorithm. The secret was no longer held by one remorseful witness. It was expanding into a documented case. The agents sealed the evidence case and added the theft allegations to the property receipt. Patent ownership would be resolved through civil and criminal proceedings, he explained, but the materials were relevant to wire fraud, false statements, and the financing Richard obtained using the disputed intellectual property. Richard's knees weakened. The agents caught his arms before he reached the floor. He looked at me with wet, furious eyes. "You should be grateful," he said. "Without what I did, you never would have become this powerful." For years, I had imagined hearing him admit the theft. I expected rage or triumph. Instead, I felt only distance. "I became powerful because I survived what you did," I replied. "That does not make the abuse a gift." Harrison lowered his head. Richard finally stopped fighting. His professional legend had been reduced to fraud, stolen code, and a recorded confession in front of the people whose admiration he valued most. The agents began moving the prisoners toward the ballroom doors. As they opened, noise poured in from the hotel corridor. News crews had gathered in the lobby after seeing the federal vehicles outside. Camera lights flashed beyond the security line, and reporters shouted questions about the Medicare investigation. A producer recognized Dr. Harrison and heard one guest mention the stolen algorithm. Within seconds, the questions changed. "Dr. Bancroft, did you steal medical technology from your daughter?" "Ms. Bancroft, were patients harmed by falsified records?" "Is Apex Health canceling the acquisition?" The agents guided Richard, Vanessa Cameron, and Patricia into the corridor. The cameras captured every handcuff, every torn layer of Vanessa's gown, and every expression they could no longer control. The family that had spent years manufacturing a perfect public image was about to lose it, live on the evening news. Within seconds, the camera crews filled the grand hallway, casting harsh shadows against the polished marble walls. Reporters from every major local network pressed against the security line, competing for a clear view of the handcuffed defendants. The air was thick with the rapid, deafening clicks of camera shutters, capturing every humiliating angle of my handcuffed parents and my ruined sister. Reporters shouted a relentless barrage of questions, their voices overlapping in a frantic competition for the ultimate evening news scoop. "Dr. Bancroft, is it true you stole the algorithm from your daughter?" a reporter yelled, shoving a microphone close to my father's face. "Did you knowingly commit Medicare fraud to fund this wedding reception?" My father did not answer. The once proud, untouchable surgeon kept his head completely bowed, hiding his weeping face from the blinding camera flashes. He let the federal agents drag his heavy, defeated body through the gauntlet of press, utterly destroyed. But Vanessa did not possess an ounce of our father's defeated silence. The moment the bright television lights hit her tear-stained face, something inside my sister completely snapped. Her carefully manufactured persona, the elegant plastic surgeon who looked down on the world, evaporated into pure madness. "Get those cameras out of my face!" Vanessa shrieked, her voice cracking as she violently thrashed against the strong grip of the two federal agents escorting her. She kicked her bridal heels at the nearest cameraman, nearly knocking his equipment to the floor. "Do you have any idea who I am? I am a prominent physician. I am a highly respected surgeon in this city. I will sue every single one of your pathetic news stations into absolute bankruptcy for filming me." Her threats only fueled the media frenzy. The cameras zoomed in closer, eager to capture the spectacular public meltdown of a wealthy, arrogant bride. Vanessa looked absolutely unhinged. Her expensive, custom-designed wedding gown was torn at the seams, exposing layers of cheap tulle. The front of her dress had become streaked with red wine after she struggled across the spill on the ballroom floor, making it look like she had been wading through a crime scene. Her perfectly contoured makeup was smeared across her cheeks in dark, messy streaks, and her elaborate bridal updo hung in a tangled, chaotic mess around her pale, frantic face. She lunged toward a female reporter who had asked about her fraudulent billing practices, baring her teeth like a cornered wild animal. I did not do anything wrong, Vanessa screamed, spittle flying from her lips as the agents forcefully yanked her backward by her handcuffed arms. My sister is a lying, jealous psychopath. She manipulated those files. She is trying to ruin my perfect life because she is a pathetic loser. You are all a bunch of bottom-feeding vultures. I am better than all of you. The cameras recorded every single vicious insult, every deranged scream, and every pathetic flailing movement she made. In a matter of seconds, Vanessa successfully destroyed whatever tiny shred of professional dignity she had left. She cemented her public image as a corrupt criminal having a psychotic break in a ruined wedding dress. No hospital board, no medical clinic, and no wealthy social circle would ever associate with her again. She had burned her own bridges live on television. As the agents managed to drag Vanessa and my parents through the heavy revolving doors into the night air, the swarm of reporters immediately turned their attention toward me. I was standing calmly near the entrance, surrounded by my highly trained silent security detail. I did not look frantic, and I did not look afraid. I looked exactly like what I was, a billionaire chief executive officer who had just surgically excised a massive tumor from the medical industry. Madam Founder, a seasoned journalist, called out, stepping respectfully toward the edge of my security perimeter. Isabella Vance, can you provide an official statement regarding the shocking federal raid tonight? Can you confirm that Apex Health has officially canceled the corporate acquisition of the Bancroft family clinics? I stepped forward, signaling for my security guards to lower their arms and grant the press a clear, unobstructed view. I stood tall, smoothing the pristine fabric of my silver silk gown. I looked directly into the lenses of the television cameras, projecting an aura of absolute, unwavering authority. I can officially confirm that Apex Health has permanently terminated all acquisition negotiations with the Bancroft Medical Network. I stated, my voice calm, steady, and projecting a deep sense of corporate responsibility. During our rigorous financial due diligence process, my investigative team uncovered extensive, undeniable evidence of systemic Medicare fraud, falsified patient records, and gross medical negligence spanning the last 5 years. As an organization dedicated to the ethical advancement of healthcare technology, Apex Health immediately turned all gathered evidence over to the federal authorities. The reporters scribbled frantically on their notepads, completely captivated by the sheer magnitude of the scandal. It is a profound tragedy when trusted medical professionals violate their sacred oath to prioritize their own excessive greed. I continued maintaining deliberate, sincere eye contact with the cameras. The actions of Richard and Vanessa Bancroft have caused immense harm to countless vulnerable patients who relied on their clinics for honest medical care. But I want to assure the public that this dark chapter is officially over. Apex Health is not just walking away from this corrupt network. We are actively stepping up to heal the damage they caused. I paused, allowing a brief moment of silence to let the gravity of my next announcement settle over the press pool. Effective immediately, I am personally establishing a comprehensive $30 million compensation fund, I announced clearly. This private fund will be fully dedicated to supporting and reimbursing any patient who was financially or medically victimized by the fraudulent billing practices of the Bancroft family clinics. We will be working closely with federal investigators to identify these victims and ensure they receive the restitution and the proper medical care they rightfully deserve. Integrity must be the foundation of our healthcare system, and Apex Health will lead that charge. The response from the media was instantaneous and overwhelmingly positive. The journalists nodded in deep respect, recognizing that I was not just a victim of a cruel family, but a powerful ethical leader taking massive financial responsibility to right a terrible wrong. I had completely flipped the public narrative. My parents would be remembered as greedy, malicious criminals, while I cemented my reputation as a visionary philanthropist who protected the innocent patients they exploited. I had secured the absolute trust of the public in less than 3 minutes. "Thank you. That will be all for tonight," I said politely, offering a brief professional nod to the press corps. My security team immediately stepped forward, forming a protective wall to guide me through the crowded lobby. I left the press pool behind and walked through the hotel's revolving doors into the cool Beverly Hills night. Federal vehicles filled the circular drive, their emergency lights reflecting across the glass facade. Guests stood behind police barriers, speaking in hushed voices about the arrests. My security team formed a quiet perimeter around me, but for the first time that evening, I did not feel surrounded. I felt free. A dark transport vehicle waited near the end of the drive. 2 female agents were preparing Vanessa for the short trip to federal processing. Her custom gown was torn along one side and stained with the same red wine Patricia had thrown at me. Crystals had fallen from the bodice, leaving empty threads that caught the flashing light. Her hands were cuffed behind her, and without the ballroom audience, her rage had collapsed into exhausted disbelief. I asked my security chief to request a few seconds with her. The agents checked with their supervisor and allowed me to approach while they remained within arm's reach. Vanessa lifted her head. "You enjoyed this," she whispered. "You waited 7 years to destroy my wedding." I looked at her carefully. She still believed the wedding was the tragedy. Not the patience, not the stolen money, not the altered records, the ruined photographs and public humiliation mattered more to her than the people who had trusted her white coat. "I did not create the evidence," I said. "I did not make you sign false charts. I did not make Cameron steal from Apex Health. And I did not make Richard steal my work. I simply stopped carrying the consequences for all of you." She tried to straighten her shoulders. "When this is over, Father will fix it. Our lawyers will prove you manipulated everything. Your father confessed in front of federal agents, physicians, and cameras." I replied. "Cameron's transfer records are preserved. Your own emails explain how to change patient histories. There is no family reputation left to hide behind." Her face crumpled for 1 second, then hardened again. "At least I had a family," she said. "You have employees who are paid to pretend they respect you." That insult would have wounded the 26-year-old woman standing in the rain. It meant nothing to me now. The people beside me had remained because I had earned their trust, not because blood or money required obedience. I reached into the hidden pocket of my silver gown. My fingers closed around the crumpled $100 bill I had picked up from the ballroom floor before the evidence presentation. The wine had dried into one corner, leaving the paper wrinkled and dark. Vanessa watched my hand with growing confusion. I stepped closer and placed the bill inside the torn edge of her bodice, exactly where she could feel it but could not reach it with her hands cuffed. "What is that?" she asked. "The same pocket change you threw at me," I said. "Take it and get an Uber to jail, Vanessa." One of the agents looked away to hide the briefest smile. Vanessa stared at me speechless. The line she had used to reduce me to nothing had returned at the moment when her own status, money, and borrowed power were gone. The agents guided her into the transport vehicle. She tried to turn for one final insult, but the steel door closed between us with a solid mechanical sound. Through the small reinforced window, I saw her look down toward the bill hidden in her ruined gown. Another vehicle carried Richard. He did not raise his head. Patricia sat inside a local police cruiser, still arguing with an officer about the hotel invoice and demanding a private attorney. Cameron was being escorted toward a separate car by financial crimes agents. The alliance they had called a family had fractured into 4 defendants protecting themselves. Mr. Sterling approached with the written release of my temporary card authorization. The hotel had removed my hold and transferred the account back to the original contracting parties. He apologized again for the treatment I had received inside his ballroom and offered to send a cleaning specialist for my dress. "Keep the security footage preserved," I said. "The dress can remain exactly as it is until the evidence photographs are complete." Maya joined me carrying the acquisition binder. The board's emergency resolution had been transmitted. The Bancroft transaction was formally terminated. Patient records were secured, and a continuity team was already coordinating with regulators so innocent patients would not lose access to medication or urgent care when the clinics closed. That mattered more to me than the destruction behind us. Revenge without responsibility would have made me another version of Richard. I wanted the guilty exposed, but I would not abandon nurses, receptionists, or patients who had never known what the owners were doing. My car waited at the curb. Before entering, I looked once at the bright hotel windows. 7 years earlier, I had left my parents' house carrying a wet suitcase and believing I had lost everything. Tonight, I walked away from their collapse with nothing taken from them except the protection their lies had provided. I did not wave at the cameras. I did not search for one last reaction from my mother. I entered the car and the driver pulled away from the hotel. As Beverly Hills disappeared behind us, I opened a clean file on my tablet. At the top was the first proposal for a foundation serving young adults abandoned by controlling families. I had spent years building the power to defend myself. The next chapter would use that power to make sure someone else did not have to begin alone. The sharp, loud, and professional ring of the sleek telephone on my massive glass desk pulled my immediate attention away from the quarterly financial reports. I had been sitting in my corner office, enjoying the quiet serenity that only total independence could provide. It had been 18 months since the disastrous wedding reception. I reached out and pressed the blinking button on the speakerphone. My executive assistant informed me in a carefully controlled voice that a woman was standing in the main lobby, demanding to see me. Before I asked for a name, my mind drifted back to the absolute chaos that had consumed my former family over the past 18 months. The fallout from the federal raid at the Grand Meridian Hotel had been swift, brutal, and entirely merciless. The evidence my forensic accountants had gathered was so incredibly thorough and undeniable that Richard and Vanessa never even had the chance to mount a proper legal defense. Their expensive defense attorneys took one look at the heavily documented Medicare fraud, the falsified patient records, and the stolen intellectual property, and immediately advised them to accept a plea deal. They were both stripped of their medical licenses, permanently, completely banned from ever practicing medicine or stepping foot inside a surgical center again. The federal judge presiding over their case showed absolutely no leniency for wealthy doctors who exploited vulnerable patients for luxury cars and country club memberships. Richard and Vanessa were both sentenced to significant time in a federal penitentiary. The arrogant, untouchable surgeon and his cruel, golden child daughter were now wearing standard-issue prison uniforms, their prestigious social status reduced to nothing but inmate identification numbers. Cameron did not fare any better. The cowardly groom who had tried to steal from my company to cover his massive underground gambling debts found himself completely ruined. Apex Health immediately fired him and handed all evidence of his corporate embezzlement straight to the authorities. His assets were entirely frozen, his bank accounts were seized, and he was currently under heavy investigation by the Financial Crimes Division. The man who had married my sister for her supposed wealth was now completely bankrupt, facing his own lengthy prison sentence while desperately trying to dodge the dangerous creditors who were still hunting him down for their money. He lost his career, his freedom, and his pride in a matter of minutes. But the most spectacular, devastating downfall of all belonged to my mother, Patricia. She had managed to avoid federal prison because Richard had meticulously kept her name off the fraudulent clinic documents, preferring to handle the illegal business operations entirely on his own. But avoiding a prison cell did not mean she escaped punishment. Her punishment was arguably far worse for someone who had spent her entire adult life worshipping wealth and social prestige. When I dropped that $250,000 catering invoice at her feet during the wedding reception, I had triggered an unstoppable financial avalanche. With Richard's accounts frozen by the federal government and the clinics officially shut down, Patricia had absolutely no way to pay the furious hotel management. The debt collectors came after her with a vicious, unrelenting aggression. Without her husband's illegal income to prop up her lavish lifestyle, her entire world collapsed in a matter of days. The bank swiftly foreclosed on the sprawling mansion in the wealthy hills above Los Angeles. The luxury vehicles were repossessed straight from the driveway. Patricia was forced to sell off her designer handbags, expensive diamond jewelry, and custom clothing just to afford basic legal representation during the bankruptcy hearings. The wealthy elite friends she had spent decades trying to impress completely abandoned her. The country club revoked her membership, and the hospital administrators, who used to attend her charity galas, refused to even return her desperate phone calls. She became a total social pariah, a toxic reminder of a massive public scandal that nobody wanted to be associated with. Now the woman who used to sneer at anyone she considered beneath her was living in a cramped, dingy rented apartment on the outskirts of Los Angeles. She was completely broke, entirely alone, and constantly looking over her shoulder for aggressive debt collectors who called her phone at all hours of the day and night. She had lost her husband, her favorite daughter, her massive mansion, and her pristine social reputation. She had absolutely nothing left. My assistant cleared her throat over the speakerphone, pulling me back to the present moment in my quiet, sunlit office. She says her name is Patricia, my assistant continued, her tone laced with a thick layer of professional concern. She does not have an appointment, and she is becoming quite insistent. The security team is ready to escort her out of the building, if you would like me to give them the order. I sat back in my plush leather chair, letting the reality of the situation wash over me. Patricia was here. After 18 months of total silence after losing absolutely everything she had ever valued, my mother had somehow managed to find the corporate headquarters of Apex Health. I swiveled my chair toward the massive wall of monitors, displaying the live security feeds from around the building. I tapped the screen, maximizing the camera view of the main lobby on the ground floor. I stared at the high-definition video feed, almost unable to believe my own eyes. The woman standing near the front reception desk looked absolutely nothing like the arrogant, impeccably groomed matriarch who had thrown a glass of red wine at my chest 18 months earlier. Patricia looked entirely broken. She was wearing a faded, oversized beige sweater and a pair of plain, scuffed dark trousers. Her hair, which used to be perfectly styled and expensively highlighted every single week, was now dull flat and pulled back into a messy, careless knot at the base of her neck. Her face looked incredibly drawn and haggard, the deep lines of stress and sheer exhaustion fully visible even through the security camera lens. She looked like a woman who had not slept a full night in months. But the most pathetic detail of all was not her worn-out clothing or her exhausted posture. It was what she was holding in her trembling hands. Patricia was tightly clutching a small generic white cardboard bakery box. It was tied with a cheap, thin red string. She was standing in the immaculate, highly secure lobby of a multi-billion-dollar technology firm, holding a cheap box of assorted pastries, desperately trying to play the role of a sweet, apologetic mother dropping by to visit her successful daughter. I watched her on the monitor as she nervously shifted her weight from side to side. She looked up at the towering glass ceilings and the sleek modern architecture of the lobby, her eyes wide with a mixture of overwhelming intimidation and desperate calculating hope. She was a woman drowning in a sea of her own terrible consequences, and she had finally realized that the daughter she had completely discarded 7 years ago was her one and only remaining life raft. She thought she could simply walk into my corporate headquarters with a box of cheap baked goods, cry a few artificial tears, and manipulate her way back into a life of extreme luxury. She thought she could use the sacred concept of a mother's love to erase decades of emotional abuse, systemic cruelty, and deliberate abandonment. "Madam Founder?" my assistant asked softly through the speakerphone, breaking the heavy silence in my office once more. "Shall I instruct the security guards to remove her from the premises?" I continued to stare at the live video feed on the wall, watching Patricia weakly argue with a tall, stern security guard who was blocking her path to the executive elevators. A slow, chilling sense of absolute resolve settled deep inside my chest. "No," I said, my voice steady, cold, and echoing with unyielding authority. "Do not throw her out just yet. Deactivate the security turnstiles and allow her to take the private elevator up to my floor. Send her directly into my office so we can finally finish this whole thing once and for all." The quiet hum of the private executive elevator echoed softly through the expansive, sunlit space of my corner office. I remained seated behind my massive glass desk, my hands folded perfectly in front of me, waiting for the polished steel doors to slide open. When they finally parted, Patricia stepped tentatively onto the thick, pristine white carpet of the executive floor. The contrast between the sleek, modern architecture of my multi-billion-dollar corporate sanctuary and the broken, exhausted woman standing in the threshold was incredibly jarring. She clutched the cheap white cardboard bakery box tightly to her chest, her knuckles turning white from the sheer tension. She took a slow, hesitant step forward, her eyes darting nervously around the room. She looked at the expensive modern art on the walls, the panoramic views of the city skyline through the floor-to-ceiling windows, and finally, her gaze landed on me. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Patricia seemed entirely out of her element, visibly shrinking under the weight of the immense corporate power radiating from every inch of my office. She slowly walked toward my desk, her cheap, scuffed shoes making no sound against the thick carpet. She stopped a few feet away, swallowing hard before forcing a highly unnatural, trembling smile onto her haggard face. She placed the small bakery box gently onto the edge of my glass desk, her hands shaking so violently that the thin red string binding the box vibrated against the cardboard. "I brought you these," Patricia said, her voice cracking with a pathetic, manufactured sweetness. "They are your favorite blueberry pastries from that little bakery down the street from our old house. I remembered how much you used to love them when you were a little girl. I thought we could share them and just talk for a while." I did not look at the box. I kept my eyes locked entirely on her face, my expression an impenetrable wall of absolute ice. "I have not eaten those pastries in over 15 years, I replied, my voice completely devoid of any emotion or warmth. "And you would know that if you had ever actually paid attention to me when I lived under your roof. But we both know you are not here to share baked goods and reminisce about a childhood you spent actively making me miserable. So drop the ridiculous loving mother act, Patricia. Tell me exactly what you want so I can get back to running my company." The forced, trembling smile instantly vanished from my mother's face. The reality of my cold, unyielding reception shattered her fragile facade completely. Her shoulders slumped forward, and the sheer desperation she had been trying so hard to hide came pouring out like a broken dam. Her eyes filled with frantic, genuine tears, spilling over her dark, exhausted circles and tracking slowly down her pale cheeks. "Isabella, please," Patricia cried, her voice rising in absolute panic as she pressed her trembling hands against the smooth glass surface of my desk. "I have absolutely nothing left in this world. The banks took the mansion, the federal government seized all of our joint accounts. I am living in a filthy, tiny one-bedroom apartment in a terrible neighborhood, and I cannot even afford to pay the rent for next month. The aggressive debt collectors from the hotel are calling my phone 50 times a single day. They are threatening to take the very last of my personal belongings. I cannot live like this. I cannot survive out there with nothing. You have to help me. You have so much money now. You have this massive company. Just a small allowance, Isabella. Just enough to get me a decent place to live and pay off these angry creditors. It would be absolute pocket change to you. It would not even affect your bottom line. She took a desperate step closer, reaching her trembling hands out toward me, as if she wanted to grab my arms, but she stopped herself, clearly terrified of crossing a physical boundary. When her frantic pleas for financial salvation met only my blank, unforgiving stare, Patricia resorted to the ultimate weapon in her toxic arsenal. She tried to weaponize the very biological bond she had so violently severed all those years ago. "I am your mother," Isabella Patricia wailed, heavy, agonizing sobs racking her frail body. "You cannot just turn your back on your own mother when she is begging you for her life. I carried you inside me for 9 months. I went through the agonizing pain of childbirth to bring you into this world. I fed you, I clothed you, and I kept a solid roof over your head for your entire childhood. You owe me your very existence. Whatever mistakes I made in the past, whatever harsh words I said when I was angry, none of that changes the fundamental fact that I gave you life. You have a profound moral duty to take care of the woman who brought you into this world. Please look into your heart. You are a good person. You cannot just leave your own flesh and blood to rot in poverty while you sit up here in your crystal tower. I will do whatever you want. I will apologize every single day for the rest of my life. Just please save me. Do not let me lose everything." I listened to her pathetic, manipulative speech without a single flicker of sympathy. Her tears did not move me. Her desperate invocation of motherhood meant absolutely nothing to the woman she had spent decades trying to destroy. I slowly stood up from my plush leather executive chair, planting both of my hands firmly on the glass desk, leaning forward just enough to force her to look directly into my eyes. "You lost the right to be my mother the night you called me a defect," I said, my voice dropping to a terrifying, deadly calm that echoed sharply across the expansive room. "You lost that right when you threw your own child out into the rain-soaked street and told me to die rotting in the gutter. You did not come here today because you love me, Patricia. You came here because you are out of options, and you are utterly terrified of facing the consequences of your own cruel, greedy life. You traded your daughter for a social status that did not even belong to you, and now you have absolutely nothing to show for it. I am not your savior, and I am certainly not your personal bank account. You must live with the devastating reality." Patricia stared at me, her mouth hanging open as the finality of my words crashed down upon her like a heavy iron anvil. The absolute lack of mercy in my eyes told her everything she needed to know. The bridge was not just burned, it had been entirely eradicated. There was no going back, and there was absolutely no financial rescue coming her way. "Do not dirty the floor of my company ever again," I stated with cold, ruthless precision, my voice leaving absolutely no room for negotiation, debate, or further emotional manipulation. Without breaking eye contact, I reached out and firmly pressed the glowing red security button on my sleek desktop intercom. My assistant answered immediately, her professional voice ringing clearly through the speakerphone for my weeping mother to hear. "Yes, Madam Founder. I am standing by for your direct orders. Send the armed security team into my office immediately," I instructed. My gaze locked entirely on Patricia's horrified, trembling face. "My guest is leaving, and she will require a permanent, heavily monitored escort off the corporate premises. Ensure she never enters this building again." "Right away, Madam Founder. The team is already on their way up to your floor." I released the intercom button and slowly sat back down in my leather chair, silently watching the sheer, unadulterated terror completely consume my mother's exhausted features. The heavy polished steel doors of the private elevator dinged softly in the background, signaling the immediate arrival of my security detail. Patricia slowly turned her head toward the sound, realizing with absolute heartbreaking horror that her very last lifeline had just been brutally and permanently severed. The life of luxury she desperately craved was gone forever. The heavy steel doors of my private elevator opened completely, and two tall, broad-shouldered security guards stepped into my office. They moved with quiet, imposing efficiency, their eyes locked on the weeping woman standing near my desk. Patricia saw them approaching, and the fragile, pathetic facade she had been desperately clinging to instantly shattered into a million pieces. The artificial tears abruptly stopped falling. Her posture shifted from a trembling, helpless victim into a rigid, defensive stance. The sheer panic in her eyes rapidly hardened into a vile, recognizable rage. She realized that her performance had failed, that my heart was utterly closed to her, and that she was about to be physically thrown out of the only building that held her financial salvation. "Do not touch me!" Patricia screeched, her voice cracking as the first security guard reached out to grasp her arm. She violently slapped his hand away, her face twisting into a mask of pure, unadulterated venom. "You think you are so powerful now, Isabella. You think sitting behind this giant glass desk makes you better than me? You are nothing but an ungrateful, vindictive little brat. You destroyed your father. You sent your own sister to a federal prison. You took away everything I ever worked for. I hope this company burns to the ground. I hope you lose every single penny you have and end up rotting in the street just like you deserve." I remained perfectly still in my leather chair, watching her spew the toxic poison that had infected our family for decades. Her vicious words did not hurt me. They only validated the decision I had just made. She was finally showing her true colors, completely stripped of her wealthy socialite disguise. She did not care about the fact that her husband and daughter had committed massive medical fraud, endangering the lives of innocent patients. She only cared that I had exposed them and cut off her endless supply of stolen money. "Get her out of my building," I commanded calmly, picking up a silver pen from my desk and turning my attention to a stack of paperwork, entirely dismissing her presence. The security guards did not hesitate for another second. They moved in unison, grabbing Patricia by both of her arms and firmly locking her into a controlled escort hold. She kicked her scuffed shoes against the thick white carpet, thrashing wildly as they dragged her backward toward the open elevator. She screamed profanities, her voice echoing off the high ceilings and glass walls, hurling every vicious insult she could think of. I did not look up from my desk. The elevator doors finally slid shut abruptly, cutting off her unhinged screaming and plunging my office back into a deep, peaceful silence. I looked up at the wall of security monitors, watching the silent video feed as the guards escorted my thrashing mother down to the ground floor. They marched her straight through the immaculate modern lobby, ignoring the shocked stares of my corporate employees. When they reached the main entrance, the guards forcefully pushed Patricia out onto the concrete sidewalk. She stumbled slightly, nearly dropping her cheap bakery box. She turned around, her face red with rage, and pounded her fists against the exterior glass. But the massive automatic glass doors slid firmly shut, locking securely behind her. The thick, reinforced glass permanently severed the connection between our two worlds. She was officially locked out of my life forever, left to wander back to her dingy apartment and face the angry debt collectors, completely on her own. I let out a long, heavy breath, feeling a profound sense of physical and emotional weight completely lift from my shoulders. The toxic shadow of the Bancroft family was finally gone. I turned off the security monitors and focused my attention on the thick legal portfolio resting on the center of my desk. This was not regular corporate paperwork. These documents represented the final essential piece of closure I needed to truly move forward. For the past 18 months, my elite team of corporate litigators had been engaged in a relentless, highly aggressive legal battle to recover my grandfather's private trust fund. Richard had spent years trying to illegally drain those accounts, using complex financial loopholes to siphon the money into his own offshore reserves. But after his spectacular public arrest and the subsequent federal asset freezes, my lawyers had successfully petitioned the court to fully restore the trust to its rightful intended beneficiary. The judge had ruled entirely in my favor just 3 days ago. The massive sum of money my grandfather had set aside to protect me was finally under my absolute control. I opened the heavy blue folder, staring at the staggering numerical figure printed on the official bank transfer documents. It was tens of millions of dollars. For my father, this money had represented an endless source of greed and unchecked power. For my mother, it was a superficial tool to buy country club memberships and designer gowns. But for me, it represented something entirely different. It represented freedom. I picked up my silver pen and hovered the tip over the signature line on the final transfer authorization form. I had no intention of keeping a single dime of my grandfather's money for my own personal use. I had built a multi-billion-dollar technology empire entirely from scratch, relying on my own intellect, my own grueling hard work, and my own relentless determination. I did not need the Bancroft family money to survive, and I certainly did not want their tainted wealth inflating my corporate bank accounts. I wanted to use this money to create a legacy that would actively dismantle the kind of systemic cruelty I had endured my entire life. I pressed the pen to the paper and signed my name with smooth, confident strokes. With that single signature, I officially transferred the entire balance of my grandfather's private trust fund into a newly established independent philanthropic organization. I named it the Horizon Foundation. The foundation was specifically designed to provide massive financial grants, full-ride educational scholarships, and comprehensive mental health support to young adults who had been financially abandoned or emotionally abused by their own families. I was taking the wealth that Richard and Patricia had tried to steal and using it to empower the very people they would have casually thrown out onto the street. My grandfather would have been incredibly proud. I closed the folder, setting my silver pen aside. A profound, unshakable peace settled deep within my heart. The lingering ghosts of my past, the painful memories of crying on the rain-soaked driveway, the sting of being called a worthless defect simply melted away into nothingness. I was completely free. The afternoon sun slowly dipped below the tall buildings of the Los Angeles skyline, casting long, elegant shadows across my executive office. The soft, ambient light of the city began to twinkle in the distance, signaling the end of the day. The phone on my desk chimed softly, breaking my quiet contemplation. I pressed the speaker button, leaning back in my leather chair. "Madam Founder," my executive assistant said, her voice bright and highly professional. "The corporate styling team has arrived with your gown, and the private car is waiting in the underground garage. The event coordinators just called from the venue to confirm that all the prominent guests have arrived, and the press pool is fully set up. We are right on schedule for the evening." "Thank you," I replied, a genuine smile forming on my lips. "Have the styling team wait for me in my private dressing suite. I will be right there." I stood up from my desk, walking slowly toward the floor-to-ceiling windows to look out over the glowing city. Tonight was not just another regular corporate networking event or a simple charity gala. Tonight was the official, highly publicized launch of the Horizon Foundation. I was preparing to step out onto a massive public stage to announce my new philanthropic initiative to the entire country. The event was going to be attended by the most powerful politicians, the most successful venture capitalists, and the most influential media figures in the nation. I was going to stand in front of hundreds of flashing cameras and officially close the book on the Bancroft family scandal. I was going to show the world exactly what a woman could build when she refused to let the cruelty of others dictate her destiny. The frightened, insecure young girl who had been kicked out of her childhood home was dead and gone. In her place stood an unstoppable force of nature, a woman who controlled her own vast empire and dictated her own unyielding terms. I turned away from the breathtaking view of the city and walked purposefully toward my private dressing suite, ready to prepare for the most important night of my entire life. Tonight, I was going to celebrate my absolute independence, and I was going to do it in spectacular fashion. The private car carried me through the illuminated streets toward the glass pavilion, where the Horizon Foundation would make its public debut. When I stepped onto the arrival carpet, camera flashes followed me, but the atmosphere was nothing like the hotel 18 months earlier. No one was waiting for a family scandal. They were waiting to hear what would be built from its aftermath. Inside the ballroom had been designed around open space rather than hierarchy. There was no elevated family table and no seating chart that placed famous names above everyone else. Young scholarship finalists sat beside venture capitalists, social workers, attorneys, university leaders, and founders who had once been rejected by their own families. Each table carried a small card with a single question: what could you build if fear no longer controlled your choices? Maya met me near the entrance. The first-year funding commitments had exceeded our projections. Apex Health Partners had pledged mentorship hours, 3 universities had offered matching scholarships, and a national counseling network had agreed to provide confidential support in every state. The trust money I transferred had become a foundation, but the people in the room were turning it into a living system. Daniel introduced me to the first grant recipients. One was a 19-year-old woman who had been expelled from her home after refusing an arranged career path. She had built a low-cost device that helped elderly patients organize medication. Another was a young man who had slept in his car while developing software for rural emergency clinics. A third recipient planned to create transitional housing for students cut off by abusive relatives. Their stories were different from mine, yet I recognized the same mixture of fear and determination in their eyes. None of them needed to be told that suffering automatically made them stronger. They needed rent, tuition, legal advice, therapy, and adults who would not use help as a leash. When the program began, Dr. Harrison took a seat near the side of the stage rather than among the honored guests. He had provided a full sworn statement in the patent case and resigned from the remaining ceremonial positions that had once protected his status. He had also donated the speaking fees from his final years in medicine to fund an independent ethics fellowship. His apology could not erase 7 years of silence, but he was accepting consequences instead of demanding forgiveness. That was the only form of remorse I was willing to respect. The Master of Ceremonies described Horizon's mission, then invited me to the podium. The room rose, the applause was steady, not frantic, and I allowed myself to receive it without searching the crowd for Richard's approval or Patricia's criticism. 7 years ago, I began again with a wet suitcase and less than $200, I said. For a long time, I believed survival meant proving my family wrong. That belief kept me moving, but it could not be the destination. A life built only in opposition to cruelty still gives cruel people too much control. The screens behind me displayed the Foundation's 3 commitments: immediate stability, independent opportunity, and long-term community. We would fund emergency housing for young adults suddenly disowned. We would provide scholarships and business grants without requiring parental signatures. We would connect recipients with licensed counselors, legal advocates, and mentors, trained to support rather than control. Blood can create a relationship, I continued, but it does not guarantee safety, respect, or love. No young person should have to choose between obedience and homelessness. No parent should be permitted to call financial control a gift while using it to erase a child's identity. Horizon exists to give people the time and resources to make a free choice. I did not mention Patricia's attack or repeat Vanessa's public humiliation. The criminal cases were progressing without my commentary. Richard and Vanessa had lost their licenses and entered guilty pleas to multiple federal counts. Cameron's embezzlement case remained pending, supported by records he could not explain away. Patricia faced the financial collapse she had once considered impossible. Their consequences belonged to the courts now. This night belonged to the people. beginning their own lives. I invited the three first recipients onto the stage. Each received a sealed grant letter, a housing guarantee, and the contact information for a mentor who had already agreed to work with them. The young woman with the medication device opened her letter and covered her mouth. Her grant was large enough to complete clinical testing without surrendering control of her invention to an exploitative investor. "You keep your name on it," I told her quietly when she reached me. "No one gets to take credit for your mind." The words carried farther than I intended. Dr. Harrison lowered his eyes. Several guests stood again. After the presentations, representatives from 2 hospital systems announced that they would pilot the recipients' technologies. A venture fund matched Horizon's startup grants. The university partners expanded their scholarship commitment from 20 students to 50. What had begun as the recovery of my grandfather's trust was growing beyond any family legacy. Near the end of the evening, my executive team gathered beside me on the terrace. They were the people who had worked through nights, challenged my decisions, protected patients during the Bancroft shutdown, and told me the truth, even when it was inconvenient. They did not call themselves my family, and I did not need them to. Loyalty freely chosen was stronger than devotion demanded by blood. Maya handed me a glass of sparkling water. To Horizon, she said, "To everyone who was told they would fail alone," Daniel added. I looked through the pavilion windows at the scholarship recipients, exchanging contact information, laughing, and planning projects that would exist long after the Bancroft name disappeared from medical buildings. The old family empire had depended on fear, secrecy, and stolen work. This new community depended on transparency and shared opportunity. I raised my glass. Success was not the amount of money I controlled, or the number of powerful people who knew my name. It was the fact that I could stand in a room filled with respect and no longer confuse that respect with permission to exist. To independence, I said, and to building doors for the people who were thrown out of theirs. The glasses lifted around me. Beyond the terrace, Los Angeles shone across the dark horizon. I smiled, surrounded by colleagues, new founders, and a future no toxic family could enter without my consent. Looking back on this entire journey, I have learned that blood does not automatically make someone family. Society conditions us to believe that we must endlessly forgive our toxic relatives, but sometimes the people who are supposed to protect you are the exact ones you need protection from. When family members value social status, money, or a golden child over your well-being, they are showing you exactly who they are. Being treated as a disappointment or an outcast is never a reflection of your actual worth. It is merely a projection of their own deep insecurities and selfish limitations. For years, I allowed their cruel words to dictate my value. But the moment you stop seeking validation from people who are fundamentally incapable of giving it you, reclaim your power. True freedom begins the day you walk away and decide to build your own sanctuary. Emotional and financial independence are the greatest armor you can wear. When you focus on your own growth instead of their approval, you transform from a victim into the architect of your own destiny. The sweetest revenge is not simply exposing their lies or watching their corrupt empires crumble, even though holding them accountable is entirely necessary. The ultimate victory is waking up every morning, looking in the mirror, and realizing you are completely happy, successful, and whole without them. You define your own legacy. If you have ever had to walk away from toxic relatives to protect your own peace, please know that you are not alone and you are stronger than you think. Have you ever had to establish firm boundaries with your family? Share your story in the comments below. Please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel for more stories about resilience, boundaries, and reclaiming your power. Thank you for watching.